Tottenham were convincing and strong in their first win away at West Ham in 6 years, winning 3-0 yesterday. Were Spurs perfect by any stretch of the imagination? No. Are there things that Thomas Frank still needs to work on? Yes. Do we have a problem in build-up? I think we do a little bit, and we're going to touch on that in this game, but there is so much to be positive about. If you are new to the channel, please make sure to subscribe. Thank you very much for 15k subs. We're on the way to 100k on TikTok. The support recently has been absolutely fantastic, so make sure to lock in and support the journey, and there will be a preview of Villarreal coming tomorrow, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss that. In this video, we're going to talk about how Tottenham kind of struggled to build up through the thirds against West Ham in the first half, how we started to kind of change that and wrestle a bit of momentum and gain control towards the end of the first half, the importance of set pieces when you're not quite clicking in the most fluid way, as we're not yet under Frank. We're going to talk about the individual performances of Simons, of Kudus, of Lucas Bergvall, who was absolutely outstanding yesterday and why he was key to Tottenham's midfield. We're obviously going to talk about the setup as well, how Spurs set up in this game. And we are, let's get straight into it really. So Spurs, I think there was obviously change in personnel from the Bournemouth game. The midfield in that game was Paulinho, Bentancur and Sarr. Bergvall came into this one, Bentancur came out, Sarr, I think he should be at the moment, the constant in that kind of midfield. And obviously we saw a debut for Xavi Simons over on that left-hand side as well. Now, I think one of the issues that Spurs have been having a little bit under Thomas Frank is kind of central progression. And I think having a number 10 to come in Simons, who likes to sort of drop deep and help us progress through the thirds. We all thought that maybe he'd come in and start in the number 10 yesterday, but he didn't. He started out on the left, so it was still a little bit of an issue for Spurs. Not a massively detrimental issue that obviously cost us the game, but I think it's obviously something to look at. There's been a lot of chat around João Paulinho after the game yesterday. Not all of it I agree with, to be honest. I agree with some of the concerns, but I do feel like people could maybe be a little bit more balanced in their view of him, potentially, with the fact that he offered so much off the ball yesterday as well. When you look at the stats, the most amount of duels won in the game, the most amount of tackles won in the game as well. I think he is important for games like this, but I understand why people have criticisms of him. But I think it's kind of bigger than that. It's bigger than his lack of bravery on the ball and Spurs' need for a six that's going to kind of help us punch through the lines. If we go through early on in the game, obviously Spurs kind of built up in a three a lot of the time. You see Spence kind of tucking in here. A lot of the time it was Pedro Porro, who will kind of come on to, would also be helping build up into these areas, and Spence would be the one that would kind of be here on the touchline. But Spence kind of tries this little ball over the top to Lucas Bergvall and makes a run. It doesn't quite work. We were quite direct in the way that we wanted to build out. We didn't try to necessarily play through West Ham's press. They didn't really commit that many bodies forward in their press, unlike Bournemouth, who pressed very high man-to-man, and Spurs had a real inability and struggle to kind of play through that. We haven't done a video on Bournemouth. I was planning to do a video basically not on the game itself, but talking about what we've learned from Thomas Frank's first 3 games so far. That was after the Bournemouth game. I wanted to do that, but I was very busy the day after. I was on the overlap and the deadline day stuff and all that kind of thing, and I just wanted a little bit of a break from YouTube over the international break and come back kind of fresh. So we're going to do that after the first 5 games. We're going to do that after Villarreal, and I also think it presents a bit more of a well-rounded package and a bigger sample size to kind of speak about, really. But Spurs were kind of, they were tried to be direct in their build-up. West Ham, like I said, didn't press us man-to-man and didn't put too much pressure on us like Bournemouth did. And I think that almost in a way, like, I don't know, it just didn't, Spurs didn't really adapt necessarily the way that we tried to kind of build out, really. Again, you can kind of see here, Porro now the one tucking into that back three. Someone did a really good piece on that kind of double width that Spurs like to offer, kind of those straight passes down the line. Pat Matasar, you can kind of see a replication of what we were doing against Man City with those balls down the line. Then you've got kind of Pap Sarr moving into these advanced areas to kind of get knockdowns for people to play off. It wasn't really necessarily working that well. Again here, in kind of deeper build-up, you can see Vicario saying to Paulinho to come and kind of get the ball short, but again, Spurs end up kind of working it wide and into Van de Ven, who goes long over the top to Simons, and again, it doesn't just quite work. Spurs not really finding their groove when building out from the back. Again here, this is an example, and someone highlighted this on Twitter, EBL, who does good kind of analysis. I saw this this morning when I was kind of reading other people's sort of thoughts on the game. I wanted to get some different perspectives, and I think he kind of made a good point here. Like, this is what I sort of touched on with the man-to-man press. Obviously, West Ham have only got 3 players kind of committed here in this kind of screenshot. I don't really understand why Bergvall and Sarr need to be this low. I think they can maybe be a little bit higher, because West Ham aren't really they're not opening up, they're not overcommitting that could open up to sort of open themselves up to kind of leaving gaps really. And with Spurs kind of wanting to go a little bit more direct anyway, you can kind of push Bergvall and Sarr a little bit further forward, I think, to kind of help win those second balls and those knockdowns. So I think they're kind of almost like, where West Ham aren't being so aggressive like Bournemouth were, you don't need as many kind of bodies back to help us build through. It kind of almost, with the amount of players there, it kind of limits the passing options a little bit. It's almost like there's too many players in that zone really. It kind of needs a bit more variance. And we kind of move out to the right-hand side here with Porro, who goes down the line. And again, this has kind of been a bit of a familiar pattern in Spurs' build-up. We saw it against Man City. And this time it actually did work, to be fair. It allowed us to open up the pitch. Porro goes down the line into Kudus, who gets a really good touch away from Ward-Prowse. And this is what I do like, to be fair, about this kind of central to right sort of build-up, working the ball out to Porro and kind of playing those balls down the line. Kudus is very good at winning those duels on the touchline, which means he can kind of win them, spin away, and then kind of drive into this space here. And he does that, and he sprays the ball out wide to Spence. But I think with Spence, it's almost like, and I can understand why a lot of people wanted a doggy to start this game, because of the angles, right? Obviously, if you're going to place Xavi Simons on the left, or any of our wingers that are kind of in the frame of playing at the moment, whether it's Johnson or whether it's Tell or whether it's Simons or Odegaard, they kind of all like to come inside. So I think it's very good to kind of have someone who is able to create those angles better, to go round maybe on their left foot and kind of open up the space for someone to come inside, like Xavi Simons here, right? And obviously Spurs work the ball from right to left quite nicely here, but Spence loses out, I think it's handball, but there was kind of so many frustrating situations like this, and it wasn't Spence's fault really, where if you had maybe more of a natural overlapper, you could have caused them more problems. Spurs again kind of going build up from deep. Here's Simons on the left. Spurs work it back to Vicario. One thing I did kind of notice, and I saw a few people pick up on this as well about Vicario, is I think his distribution is starting to slowly get a little bit better. Spurs did want to go more direct at times, which made sense with West Ham kind of not committing loads of bodies in the press, sitting off a little bit. They weren't offering loads of space in behind, but there were moments where Spurs maybe still had bodies committed from set pieces or whatever, where Spurs could recycle back and then launch kind of forwards, and that's what Vicario did here. It's a lovely touch from Kudus, and this is what I really, really like about Kudus, right? And I know a lot of West Ham fans will kind of say, oh, he did nothing yesterday. They were desperate for him not to get a goal or an assist, and I think his end product will be a little bit frustrating at times. I think we saw that maybe in moments yesterday, but when you get him in these kind of situations, this is what I love about him, right? Because he's kind of facing up to come back inside here. You think left foot, that's kind of naturally what he wants to do. A little bit like Noni Madueke, and that's what I like what Madueke does as well. That's that unexpected, that unpredictability and that kind of variance in his game, right? So comfortable then coming, shifting back and going to the byline and kind of forcing these kind of crosses. And he did that quite well yesterday, and what it did lead to was something that I spoke about on Twitter. I didn't do a preview for this game, but anyone that kind of read my Twitter thread was about kind of getting Kudus and maybe getting Spence to the byline to create cutback opportunities for these kind of situations with Sarr and Porro kind of in this half space to deliver those kind of clip crosses. And it's something we were able to do quite well when we did kind of sustain that bit of pressure in the game. But kind of still focusing on Spurs' build-up for the moment here. Like, again, can Sarr and Bergvall just get that little bit higher? West Ham are committing a few more bodies forward here in the press, but maybe if you are kind of forced to go in a little bit direct, can you get a bit more higher? Van der Ven tries to kind of punch this ball through the lines to Tell, who kind of drops in, but it doesn't quite work. It's just not quite working out for Spurs. Romero, though, obviously makes a massive difference, and I do think there's a little bit of an over-reliance on Romero in the build-up at the moment, and not having a quality six who can kind of receive on the half-turn and kind of punch through the lines. Again, it's not a criticism of Paulinho, it's just not the sort of player that he is, right? Romero, I just feel like we'll maybe be a little bit too reliant at times on Romero here. But this is one other issue that I sort of slightly have, right? Is that Romero, this is such a great pass that takes how many players out of the game here? 1, 2, 3, 4 West Ham plays in that press, takes them out of the game. But I'm not quite sure Pat Matasar is necessarily the player that you want receiving the balls in these kind of areas. I think this is where you want Simons in that kind of pocket rather than out on that left-hand side, because I think Simons is in a much better, with the way that he plays and how fluid he kind of is and how good he is on the half-turn, there's a really good opportunity for Sarr here to kind of get forward and sort of attack this kind of space and turn and run. That's what we weren't able to do, and it was quite frustrating that one of the times in that first half out from the back we were able to really cut through West Ham's sort of half press. it was kind of almost the wrong man almost on the end of the pass, really, because Sarr's not that sort of player that's going to receive on the half turn there, and he kind of plays it back, and then Spurs recycle, and it's just a little bit more safe, and then we work it back to Romero, and it kind of from side to side here. So one thing though, again, talk about Matisse Tell quite quickly. I thought his hold up play was quite mixed yesterday. This is one thing that we were able to do quite well at times when he was able to draw kind of centre back out. If we could go a little bit more direct, we have got players that are really good at feeding off those second balls. So it wasn't all necessarily bad in terms of our build up. Again, it's kind of Porro trying to play that kind of clip ball down the line. Obviously, Tell kind of comes inside here, and Kudus is so excellent at feeding off these kind of scraps. And obviously, there's a really good opportunity here for Spurs to get the ball out from right to left. Kudus obviously kind of checks inside. Then obviously look at the space that Xavi Simons is in here, and he's thinking, brilliant, I can kind of go and attack and kind of go and drive into these central areas and attack these central areas. And we do get the ball out to him. Spence obviously does get on the overlap. This is what a lot of situations that Spurs did get themselves into, and this is what I liked from Xavi. There was a willingness to kind of drive into these central areas. Every time he picked the ball up, he had intent, he had purpose. Not everything kind of came off for him yesterday, as it didn't really here. Sort of tries to little bounce pass into Bergvall, and they're not quite necessarily on the same wavelength. I think that was almost a bit of an issue, not to kind of put down any of our other players, but I think sometimes at times they weren't maybe on the same wavelength as a Simons. But Spurs again here, kind of recycling the ball in the middle of the park. Romero, that's what he does so well, and I thought Romero was excellent yesterday, especially on the ball. Is able to kind of just be a bit more direct, a bit more aggressive, and play this lovely ball out to Simons, who can face up Walker Peters 1v1. One thing I really liked about Bergvall's game yesterday was these channel runs when he was kind of playing that 8 or the kind of furthest forward of that midfield 3. Did that quite a lot to open up space. Received the ball at times in these kind of areas, but also did it so Simons could kind of make this run inside here, which is what he did, face up Walker Peters, and this is the dangerous areas you can get Simons in. He has a shot, and obviously it is deflected wide. On Xavi Simons quickly, let's kind of talk about him now before we start to focus on Spurs getting a little bit more control in the game. There was a few really nice moments from him, and you can kind of just see his quality here. Here's Spurs winning the ball in the middle of the pitch. Bergvall picking up the scraps he did so well. Simons is already kind of starting to make that run into that space here. Sarr footing the ball. Lovely little clip pass over to Simons, actually. And again, you see Tell kind of making this channel run as well. Simons had this quite a lot at Leipzig, where coming off this left-hand side, he'd almost have two sort of split strikers making channel runs ahead of him, which meant that he could sort of drive into this space. And that's what he does here. Can he find this little ball into Bergvall? Yes, he can. It's the braver kind of pass. Bergvall sort of pops it off, and then Spurs can move it to right to left. Lovely little play from Sarr there. Porro goes for the shot, but ends up kind of playing the ball out wide to Kudus instead. And again, this is what I like about Kudus. If Simons can kind of drive into that central area to commit bodies, to leave Kudus a little bit more isolated 1v1, that's what I like, because he's very, very good at getting around the fullback, tries to get the cross in, and it's blocked. Romero, foot on the ball here. Spurs move out to that left-hand side where Simons is. Spence on that kind of same line as Simons here. Obviously, the problem is that you're almost asking Simons to kind of receive with his back to goal the whole time. That was a lot of the issue that we had against Bournemouth with Johnson. He's not necessarily comfortable doing that. Simons is more so. And he kind of draws Kyle Walker-Peters onto him. Lovely little nutmeg here. And then Spence can kind of make that run to burst ahead of him to keep the attack alive. Simons is fouled. Spence gets there first. He gets into this kind of area. Tries the sort of Trivela outside of the foot cross into the near post there. That's again maybe where you're just looking for a doggy potentially is better in those kind of zones where he can get to the byline and make something happen rather than kind of the sort of awkward mechanics of crossing in these kind of areas. Again, Simons kind of works it here. A couple of little nice bounce passes, kind of little 1-2s, works it back to Romero, who's able to kind of get up the pitch here. And again, when you talk about Romero's line breakers, just superb, right? You see, obviously, Pat Matasar kind of here. Romero, superb ball into him again, taking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 West Ham players out the game. Sarr, it's actually, again, you probably want someone with a little bit more guile and kind of that sort of low central gravity receiving that position, but Sarr actually does really, really well, and he pops it off to Simons, and this is where you're thinking, right, get a shot off at goal. This is the sort of areas that he absolutely loves to be in. This is what we kind of spoke about before the game on Twitter. But again, when you're thinking about him maybe not being on the same wavelength as his teammates at the opponent at the moment, he wants Spence here. He wants kind of Spence making this sort of run, but he's just not there. It's clever from Simons, but there's no one there. And he kind of turning round to Spence to say, like, come on, get up with me. But again, those are things that are going to work themselves out and iron themselves out over time. But this is one thing I like that Spurs did as well, is that when we did start to gain control of the first half, and kind of had that momentum, especially after the goal, which is something you can kind of see here, the disallowed goal, West Ham had their periods, but Spurs really dominated towards the end of that second half, is that we obviously threatened a lot from set pieces. And there was a lot of kind of second balls where, but because we're putting so much pressure on the goalkeeper, he's kind of punching out. Spurs are picking up the second one, and they get themselves in these kind of positions where you can create cutback opportunities from the line. Simons can kind of get into this pocket where you like him. This is something I spoke about on Twitter before the game, if you remember, and he can get those crosses into a really packed penalty area. It's a really good delivery. Again, these are just kind of little moments where you can see his quality. So really, really good stuff. Obviously involved in the goal as well. It's a really good delivery from Simons. Great for him to get off the mark in terms of an assist. We'll kind of come on and talk about that more shortly in terms of what Spurs did. But there was one kind of last little moment of quality I wanted to touch on before we kind of move on to the rest of the game and these other little bits. Vicario here, again talking about his distribution. This is lovely from Simons. Spurs able to counter-attack in the second half. Ball goes out to Simons here. This little nutmeg on Paqueta, it's just gorgeous. And the little, you can see sort of the, you can kind of see, if you kind of zoom in on Simons here, the sort of no-look kind of pass. That's his kind of sign of his quality, and he plays a lovely little ball in for Tell, who can't quite get there. But again, it's going to take time. It's going to take a bit of rhythm. I think it was almost perfect for him to kind of have 70 minutes and then come off with obviously a game on Tuesday, but just getting him used to the pace and the intensity of the league. But I think he showed enough quality for Spurs fans to kind of really be excited about him. But let's go on to how Spurs kind of started to get a little bit more control in that first half. And I want to talk about Bergvall's kind of role in this as well. I think he was really buzzy, really kind of bright, really looking to sort of force the issue and take the game to West Ham a little bit, because I think there were maybe times where we weren't brave enough. We were a little bit too passive, a little bit too safe. And I think even though he's not that kind of line-breaking passer that you sort of want, he has that desire to really kind of make things happen. And Spurs kind of work it back here. Romero, again, if you're talking about kind of punching through the lines, taking players out the game, these two in the kind of that first phase of the West Ham press, finds Bergvall here. It's a lovely first-time little ball over to Jed Spence. And again, if you're sort of talking about the IQ and of these players, like Bergvall doesn't even look. He knows Spence is there. It's really well worked. Spence kind of faces Kyle Walker-Peters up 1v1. Again, if you're talking about kind of Bergvall's off-the-ball movement, it's really good. He kind of gets round the fullback there, is able to kind of cut it back, gets to Simons, if he can maybe get his shot off a little bit quicker. But Spurs have West Ham penned in, and we're kind of really starting to take a grip of the game, even if it's not sort of fully kind of working out for us. Again, Porro, I sort of spoke about those kind of half-space crosses, if you can get in these kind of areas with West Ham pinned back. Again, maybe you want a little bit more of a focal point in the box. I thought Tell's hold-up play was okay, but I think in this sort of game it did suit Richarlison, where we had a lot of kind of possession of the ball in West Ham's kind of final third, looking to kind of move them from side to side, getting crosses. We were putting a lot of crosses from set pieces and open play into the box as well. And Tell's movement as that number 9 isn't quite on the same level in packed penalty areas as Richarlison's is at the moment. Kind of as we move through the game here, Porro, again, that kind of clip pass down the line. And this is when it kind of can work, because Kudus, like I said, is good at picking up those second balls from the knockdowns, but he also can pluck the ball out the air like that and then drive inside. You can see Bergvall and Simons pointing here, Kudus into Bergvall, and kind of Spurs can move forward. I think it was quite frustrating here because there was a real opportunity to, again, to kind of move it out here to get Simons 1v1 against Kyle Walker-Peters. These are the areas where kind of Simons thrives in kind of transitional situations. You would have liked him to have a run there. Can Kudus kind of get his head up and find him? But Spurs kind of moved the ball out to the right-hand side. This is what I did like from Sarr when he did receive it. He was able to sort of turn and move the ball out to Kudus, who, you know, I do kind of want to see him in central areas a little bit more, but he is very effective on the touchline as well because of that two-way nature that he does have. Obviously, he receives the ball here. Kudus is very comfortable kind of taking the player down the line. It's Kilman in this instance. Obviously, Jiff is a little bit more central, but he's also very happy to kind of come inside and gets the cross in. Again, we're sort of talking about that movement in around the box. It's not necessarily bad from Tell here, but the amount of crosses we were able to get in, I think Richarlison maybe just would have given us a little bit of something more in and around the box here. Spurs kind of building out again. Can Sarr kind of get a little bit higher maybe there? But Vicario does go a little bit longer here. Tell does well there to kind of knock it down to Spence. Spence out to Simons again, that kind of desire and bravery to kind of drive into these areas where he kind of really wants to be, to open it up. He's got Kudus out there on that right-hand side, finds him, And again, Kudus, you're kind of thinking of the two-way nature of him. That's what makes him so unpredictable. You're very happy to kind of come inside here onto that left foot. West Ham don't want him to do that as well, but they know better than anyone that he's also got that ability to kind of drive to the line and get crosses on his right foot. But I spoke about Lucas Bergvall and kind of his off-the-ball movement disrupting the block a little bit. And kind of being able to kind of manipulate them and kind of create different angles, and that's what he does really well here. Obviously, just got to keep an eye on Porro down the line. Somerville's got to keep an eye on Bergvall. But look at the run that Bergvall makes again here. A little bit like the same. We've seen it kind of almost dummy runs to open up space. But look, he's aware. He knows what's happening. Kudus can look to find him there. He does. Little reverse pass into Bergvall. And Bergvall can get to the line and kind of clip the cross in. Again, Bergvall isn't necessarily the most kind of creative player that's going to give you those consistent quality crosses every single time. But he's very good at making those off-the-ball kind of late runs into the box. Spurs get the cross in. It's kind of cleared then. But Spurs are able to sustain possession. Kudus, we're able to get it back out to that right-hand side. Kudus able to face the man up 1v1. Spurs working back from the left to the right. And Kudus can get it back to Porro, who's able to get this cross in from the half space. Once again, I spoke about that before the game, as I said. And again, it wasn't quite coming off, but you could see what we were kind of trying to do. Get players in the box and cause that little bit of chaos. Pin that West Ham fullback back. Create those cutback situations and get quality balls in the box. Again, I spoke about this earlier. Set pieces, which we'll come on and speak about with the first goal, obviously. Good quality ball in right under the goalkeeper, putting pressure on him. Punch comes out. Spurs are able to recycle the ball from the wide positions. Simons again here. A nice quality cross that's headed away, but we're able to kind of sustain pressure. And again, I'm thinking about Kudus. I'm talking about that two-way ability. There's obviously an option for him to kind of cut inside and shoot there, but again, he goes to the byline, cuts it back, and I don't know how that one doesn't end up in the back of the net. So Spurs were really kind of starting to gain control of the game by that point. One little, this is one kind of thing about Simons as well, is that obviously you do want to kind of find him in these areas, right? In that kind of central space, because he has got that ability to turn and go. This is where you want to find Simons. Romero tries to do that. We have an opportunity to do that there where he can turn and go. And look at him. His momentum's kind of going that way already. He wants to run at that West Ham back line, but Bowen does intercept it. But this is what I love about Bergvall here, really. I love this tenacity. Look at him in there. We talk about Paulinho's ability to kind of win duels and win the ball back. He did that really well. Sarr did that really well, but Bergvall did that so well as well. Like, in terms of young, all-action midfielders in world football in the Premier League, there's not many better than Lucas Bergvall. There's really not. He does that really well here. And this is what I absolutely love about him, and this is what you'll kind of see on the thumbnail. That bravery in this kind of congested space to take that risk. Look at this. Bergvall, he's got three players around him in a kind of cramped area. Takes all three of them out of the game. Leaves one of them on the floor. Like, look at that. Goes back in between Fernandes and Bowen. Can be a little bit naive at times, but that little bit of bravery, maybe if you can get Bergvall slightly deeper to help you progress out from the back, because he's more comfortable receiving on the half turn under pressure rather than Paulinho in some sort of moments. I think that is one way Spurs can kind of get around the ball progression issue, as well as getting Simons a little bit kind of deeper to help with that when he is playing as a 10. But I love that bravery from Bergvall. And what it does is it allows Sarr to kind of pop this ball into Simons. Pop this ball into Simons here, where he can really then turn and kind of drive into this space, which is what he really wanted to do. And he's got Spence going around the outside and maybe doesn't get the ball off quite quickly enough, but it was much better from Spurs. And then kind of one final thing I wanted to touch on before we move on. Porro, little clip ball down the line. Again, I thought his hold-up play was actually quite decent at times. Little chest into Kudus here again, and this is what we were able to do quite well at times, and what we will look to do under Frank is get that striker dropping a little bit deeper to kind of use as that springboard, and then Spurs can kind of play from there. Kudus, under pressure, does get into that central area, which I do really, really like him, and then he can get that ball out to Xavi Simons again. He wants to receive in that kind of pocket where he can run, and he's got the sort of the space to run into there, running at that West Ham back line, but Spencer's getting around the outside of him as well. Spurs did create a lot of these kind of overlapping opportunities, and again, maybe it's a kind of lesson to learn for Frank in terms of the dynamic. If that's a doggy, maybe. Obviously, if it's a doggy, West Ham might be a little bit more wary of it and stop Spurs kind of having that space, and they know with a more natural overlap, and maybe we could hurt them a little bit more, but Spence's desire to come inside maybe means they're not as worried about it, but this is really exciting. If you can kind of get Simons in these areas running with a player going around him, obviously having to worry about him and then allowing Simons more space to drift inside. Simons does choose to use him on the overlap, and Spence gets fouled, and that's the end of the first half. And in the second half, it's sort of more of the same in terms of kind of Tottenham's build-up, going a little bit longer. You've got Sarr and Paulinho there. West Ham are kind of committed a little bit more. Again, it's not man-to-man, so can you get those guys a little bit higher up the pitch? But Bergvall is higher up the pitch here, and that's kind of what that is what kind of helps Spurs. Van der Ven Plays a long ball down the channel. Again, it's good hold-up play from Tell. And this is kind of what I was talking about. If you can get one of those number 8s a little bit higher in build-up, especially someone like Bergvall or Sarr, who is kind of really good at hoovering up on the scraps and kind of win the sort of crumbs of those knockdowns, does that really well there. It's good from Tell, and Bergvall can kind of drive, and this is the intent that we showed at the start of the second half. Again, Spence wanted to get round him. Spence left-footed cross out for a corner, and from that corner, we score, and it's good from Spurs. And this is the thing, right? When things aren't quite clicking in terms of the build-up, and there's things to kind of iron out, and chance creation from open play, it wasn't quite there necessarily for Spurs. A lot of it kind of did come from the second phases of set pieces and kind of keeping that pressure, which is obviously good, right? It's an area of the game where maybe we really struggled under Ange, but maybe we were a little bit more fluid in terms of our build-up and attacking patterns under Ange. But I think building this kind of solid base and that platform defensively first and being strong all over the pitch, especially if you can kind of maximise the opportunities from set pieces to get you those results in those early phases, and then everything can kind of come on top, and Frank can kind of learn things about what we're not doing so well necessarily. That's kind of where I'd probably rather be right now, and it's a good kind of platform to kick on at the start of the season. What I loved about this, right, obviously Sarr gets the header. They're all pointing to the bench. You can kind of see it was obviously something they did identify at half-time. Spurs did have the better of the set pieces against West Ham. We did cause them a lot of problems. And it's obviously something they kind of identified. West Ham are obviously marking sort of zonally at the near post. Bergvall does really well here to kind of block off Juff from getting to Sarr, and Sarr gets the header. Something really well worked on. And there in the background, one thing I'd like to highlight is if you stop it there. Who's that giving it the old double wanker sign to the West Ham fans? It's me. But yeah, better from Spurs obviously start the second half, and we can kind of open things up with the with that goal from a set piece, and then the red card, which obviously does help Spurs kind of really gain control of the game. But the second goal is just lovely, right? Again, if Romero isn't going to start getting credit and praise for his ball progression and his ability to play on the ball after this kind of game, I don't know when the casuals are going to wake up to it. But again, when you have got things like this in the locker and players who want to make those line-breaking runs kind of beyond the last line, even if your build-up patterns and your attacking kind of patterns aren't quite all there yet, you can get through games on kind of moments like this. There is enough quality in this team to produce, right? And Bergvall, it's such a good run. It's such a good header. Like you can see Bergvall here kind of thinking about it, arcing his body towards it, and then he makes the run. It's such a good pass. Like, such a good pass. And the third goal comes from a set piece again, a second kind of phase from a set piece, which would cause them problems. Again, putting a lot of pressure on the goalkeeper, meaning that he has to kind of come out and punch, and then Spurs can control the situation in that kind of second phase from the set piece, because it's always kind of coming out to a Spurs shirt. We can work the second ball, which is what we do here. Porro out to Tell, who kind of comes on the touchline, does well. Paulinho, despite people kind of criticising his on-the-ball ability, it's a lovely kind of first-time pass around the corner there into Bergvall. And again, Bergvall, that kind of bravery, that tenacity in the box, that low centre of gravity kind of shifting away, puts it on a plate for Van der Ven, and he wraps it into the back of the net. But despite us taking control of the game in that second half, there are issues in terms of our ball progression centrally that I think are there still for all to see, and something for Frank to definitely work out, right? But kind of an example of it here, Van der Ven out to the left-hand side, and Spence, he has to kind of come back inside. Paulinho is sort of offering him a pass, but he's sort of thinking about it. Simmons kind of comes off the line at this point, but he's being marked by Walker-Peters. Simmons is kind of able to turn, but Spurs do end up losing it here. And again, it's kind of funneling the ball out to the flanks all the time. We don't really have anyone to kind of drop in and be a little bit more brave on the ball to open up space for other people to take advantage of. And I do think this is something that I watched the Athletic breakdown really well in terms of Simmons' ability to kind of receive the ball between the lines and kind of commit players and open up space for others, right? And Simmons did this really, really well. Full credit to the Athletic for this. Simmons kind of, you saw that in that first game against Bayern Munich, dropping a little bit deeper. And if Spurs can kind of get him playing in that number 10 to just help us be a little bit less predictable in build-up, be a little bit more brave, like Damsgaard did at Brentford a lot, kind of drop deeper to open up that space in behind, I think that's something that can definitely help us. So obviously, I understand why he played Simmons out on the left, kind of getting him used to the feel of the sort of Premier League, but I do want to kind of see him in that number 10. I do want to see him kind of drop a little bit deeper to kind of commit those eights maybe a little bit further forward, and he can help us break through presses when two teams do kind of get more aggressive onto us. Someone that's just comfortable receiving the ball under pressure in difficult situations between the lines, and very good at opening up situations for others. So plenty of stuff to be positive about, some issues obviously to iron out, but I do trust Thomas Frank to do that, right? This kind of 4-3-3, that sort of flat three, can we get someone a little bit more diminutive and kind of creative in there? We've got legs, we've got ability to break up the play. Can we commit Simons a little bit more centrally as we kind of go on? I do think he'll play in that 10, obviously, of course, as time goes on, and it's only one game, right? The reality is that Spurs are 3 wins from 4 in the Premier League, only 1 goal conceded. We are building that kind of solid base defensively, and there's a lot of good stuff. There's a lot of stuff to kind of work on from an attacking point of view, but I do think we will get there. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like it for me, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment as well, let me know what you thought of the game, what you thought of the video, your talking points were, and all that kind of stuff, and I'll see you tomorrow for a Villarreal preview. Up Spurs.